the most disturbing sexual practices in ancient civilizations. Good evening to all time travelers. Before we dive into this fascinating historical journey, we invite you to subscribe to our channel to continue supporting our work and grow together. Thank you for your precious support and happy listening. Sexual practices in ancient civilizations have been a fundamental component of their cultures and beliefs, often very different from today's values. Throughout the centuries, sexuality has been interpreted and regulated in ways that today may seem curious, bizarre, or even unacceptable. Societies have always evaluated sexual behaviors according to shifting cultural criteria, defining them as normal or deviant according to their own standards. An interesting example can be found in the customs of ancient Egypt. The Pharaohs practiced marriage between brothers, and in some cases between father and daughter. This practice was intended to preserve the purity of the lineage and ensure the continuity of power within the royal family. At the same time, circumcision, which would later be adopted by the Hebrews, had an important ritual significance, being often practiced during adolescent initiation rites. The Egyptians demonstrated a pragmatic attitude towards sexuality, not indulgent but not repressive either. Egyptian fertility ceremonies, such as those described by the Greek historian Herodotus in the 5th century BC, included practices that today we would call wild. During festivals dedicated to the goddess Bastet, men and women would sail down the Nile in boats, playing musical instruments, dancing, and drinking freely. These events often culminated in collective sexual acts. Herodotus said that women would sing and dance provocatively, attracting the attention of men in a context that celebrated pleasure and fertility. A particular tradition of ancient Egypt was linked to the cult of the god Atum. Every year, the pharaohs performed a ritual of self-satisfaction on the banks of the Nile, a symbolic gesture that emulated the creation myth attributed to the god. According to mythology, Atum was born from nothing, creating life through an act of self-destruction. This ritual was not punished or condemned, but it was not universally accepted. In ancient Greece, sexuality also played a central role in culture, but in a different way than in Egypt. One well-known practice was pederasty, which was considered a rite of passage for young males. This tradition involved an adult mentor who took responsibility for a young man's military, academic, and sometimes sexual education. The boy was not considered a man until he reached marriageable age. In Athens, this practice was common among the aristocracy and, although governed by social norms, was subject to criticism. In Sparta, however, pederasty was part of military training. It is said that these relationships were often chaste, but had a strong erotic component. An extreme example of this practice was the sacred band of Thebes, composed of 150 pairs of male lovers. It was believed that their personal relationships strengthened their commitment to each other in battle. However, homosexuality among adult males was often the subject of ridicule and could generate homophobic attitudes, especially among the lower classes. In ancient Rome, sexuality was governed by a complex moral code. Although homosexuality was not considered a crime, the passive role in a relationship was seen as degrading for a free man. This aspect emerges clearly in the story of Julius Caesar, accused by his opponents of having had a homosexual relationship with Nicomedes, king of Bithynia. The Romans celebrated festivals such as Lupercalia, during which young men were initiated into sexuality. Prostitution, although considered a necessary evil, was relegated to the lower rungs of society. Even moralists such as Cato the Elder recognized its social function, believing that it allowed young men to satisfy their urges without compromising other people's families. Female sexuality, both in Greece and Rome, was often associated with sin and temptation. Symbolic images, such as that of a woman surrounded by snakes, emphasized the dangers of lust. Interestingly, masturbation was forbidden for male clergy but permitted for nuns in specific circumstances, a distinction that reflected the complexity of moral norms of the time. Another interesting aspect concerns the regulation of sexual practices through penances. For example, abortion and infanticide, although severely punished, were treated as murders and not as sexual sins. The church also tried to control alcohol consumption by the clergy, considered a potential obstacle to chastity. These practices, which may seem strange or shocking today, offer a fascinating insight into ancient societies and their interpretations of sexuality. They remind us how cultural and moral norms change over time, reflecting the needs and beliefs of each era. If you enjoyed this journey through the sexual practices of ancient civilizations, subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share the video with your friends. History has a lot to teach us, even about the most intimate aspects of human life. Thanks for following us, and see you in the next episode.